3 o'clock. The house held its breath, and then the sound arrived. It did not come from outside. It did not come from the street. It erupted from behind the living room wall. A frantic, rhythmic barking that tore through the silence of the night. Mark sat on the edge of the sofa, his eyes locked on the flat beige plaster. The sound was sharp, jagged, and possessed a desperate urgency that no living animal should mimic. It was a warning, mechanical and precise. He had lived here for 5 years, yet this intrusion had only begun 3 weeks ago. Every night, the same sequence. Every night, the same wall. Mark stood up, his muscles tight. The barking continued, vibrating through the floorboards and into the soles of his feet. He moved toward the wall, his gaze fixed on the spot where the noise seemed to concentrate. The dread was no longer a vague feeling, it was a physical weight. Mark took a single step forward. The floorboards groaned under his weight, but the barking remained constant, a relentless pulse against the plaster. He leaned in, his face inches from the wall. He pressed his ear directly against the cold surface, waiting for the vibration to rattle his skull. The moment his skin made contact, the sound vanished. Total silence. Not a fade, not a muffled echo, but an absolute, instantaneous cessation. Mark held his breath, his ear still glued to the wall, waiting for the return. 5 seconds passed. 10. Nothing. He pulled back, his brow furrowed, and turned his head to scan the room. The second his weight shifted away from the wall, the barking exploded back into existence. It was louder now, sharper, and carried a frantic, jagged rhythm that seemed to mock his retreat. He stepped back toward the wall, and the sound died again. He stepped away, and it roared back, more urgent than before. The wall was not just a barrier, it was a sensor. Mark stood in the center of the room, his pulse hammering in his throat. The house was no longer a shelter. It was an active, listening entity. Mark could not endure the cycle any longer. The sound was not just noise. It was a taunt, a rhythmic demand for his attention that had pushed him to the edge of sanity. He turned away from the wall, his eyes scanning the living room, then the hallway, then the dark, cluttered entrance to the garage. He needed a way to peel back the layers of this house. He moved with a frantic, jerky pace, his boots scuffing against the hardwood. In the garage, he found the heavy iron head of a sledgehammer, resting against the workbench. He gripped the handle. The wood was rough, cold, and solid against his palms. He lifted it, testing the weight, feeling the balance shift in his grip. His hands trembled, not from fatigue, but from the raw adrenaline surging through his veins. He walked back into the living room, the hammerhead dragging slightly, leaving a faint groove in the carpet. The barking continued, relentless and mocking, vibrating through the air. He stopped 10 feet from the wall. It was time to break the silence. Mark swung the hammer with everything he had. The head collided with the drywall, a dull, heavy thud that echoed through the room. Plaster shattered instantly, spraying white dust across the floor and coating his skin in a fine, chalky layer. He did not stop. He pulled the hammer back and swung again, the wood frame groaning under the impact. A jagged hole appeared, dark and hollow. He struck a third time, widening the gap until the wall crumbled inward, exposing the skeletal studs of the house. He dropped the hammer, the metal clanging against the floorboards, and reached into the darkness. He pulled away the remaining chunks of plaster, clearing a path to peer into the space between the walls. He clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the settling dust. He expected to see insulation or perhaps a trapped animal, but the space was empty. There was no life here. Instead, his light caught the metallic glint of an antique radio transmitter bolted firmly to the wooden studs. It was wired directly into the house's main power line. Mark reached out, his fingertips inches from the cold metal casing. He hesitated. The blinking red light drew him in. As his skin brushed the transmitter, the device crackled with a sharp, electric pop. A sound erupted from the speaker, but it was not the mechanical barking he had heard for weeks. It was his own voice, distorted and layered, perfectly mimicking the frantic, rhythmic cadence of the animal he had feared. Mark recoiled, his hand flying to his throat, as if to stop the sound from escaping his own lungs. He stumbled back, boots sliding on the scattered plaster. The transmitter clicked again, a mechanical, grinding noise that signaled a new recording. This time, the room filled with the distinct, heavy thud of his own footsteps. From earlier that evening, walking from the kitchen to the sofa, he heard the sound of his own breathing, amplified and hollow, echoing off the studs. The device was not just broadcasting, it was replaying his life in real time. He stared at the blinking light, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Mark dropped his gaze to the base of the wall. A thin black wire snaked out from beneath the floorboards, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. He followed it, his movements stiff and deliberate. The wire led him away from the living room, past the kitchen, and stopped at the heavy wooden door of the basement. He stood before the frame, his hand hovering over the iron latch. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched the barking he had endured for weeks. He took a steadying breath, gripped the cold metal, and pushed. The door groaned, swinging inward to reveal a set of steep, concrete stairs. He descended into the dark, the air growing colder and smelling of ozone and dust. At the bottom, he stepped into the main room. The space was illuminated by the harsh blue glow of dozens of screens. Each monitor displayed a different angle of his living room, frozen in high-definition detail. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by his own life captured on loop. The walls were lined with cables, all feeding into a central console that hummed with a low, steady vibration. He had found the source of the surveillance, but as he turned to scan the room, he realized he was not alone. Mark scanned the periphery of the room, his eyes adjusting to the flickering blue light. In the far corner, tucked behind a rack of humming servers, a figure sat motionless. A man sat in a swivel chair, his face partially obscured by the glow of the monitors. He wore heavy, padded headphones that completely covered his ears. As Mark took a step forward, the man turned. He did not look surprised. He did not look afraid. Instead, he offered a slow, deliberate smile that did not reach his eyes. His fingers rested on a central console cluttered with switches and dials. Mark opened his mouth to speak, to demand an explanation, but the man moved first. He pressed a single, prominent button on the board. Instantly, the silence of the basement shattered. The sound of the barking erupted from hidden speakers, amplified to a deafening, bone-shaking volume. It was not just the sound of a dog, it was warped, pitch-shifted, and layered with metallic feedback that vibrated the very floorboards beneath Mark's feet. The man watched him, his expression unchanging as the distorted, rhythmic chaos filled every cubic inch of the room, turning the air into a wall of sound. Mark lunged forward, his boots skidding on the concrete as he fought through the wall of distorted noise. Every muscle in his body strained against the sonic pressure, his hands reaching out to grab the man in the chair. The man did not flinch. He watched Mark approach with a detached, clinical interest, his fingers tightening around a heavy, industrial lever. Mark was inches away, his fingers outstretched, when the man yanked the lever down with a sharp, metallic click. The floor beneath Mark vanished. There was no transition, no warning, just the sudden, sickening sensation of weightlessness. He plummeted into the dark, his hands grasping at empty air as the concrete slab swung open like a trapdoor. He hit the bottom hard, his shoulder slamming into a narrow, cramped space that smelled of damp earth and rot. He scrambled to find a handhold, his fingernails clawing at the rough, jagged wooden studs. But the floor had already reset. The barking ceased. The sudden absence of sound was more jarring than the noise had been. Mark lay on his back, his breath ragged, the air thick with the scent of stagnant dust and dry rot. He pushed himself up, but his head struck a low beam immediately. He was in a space no wider than his own shoulders, a hollow vein running through the architecture of the house. He turned, his palms pressing against the rough, splintered wood of the studs. He crawled toward the spot where he had fallen, his fingers searching for a seam, a latch, anything that would yield. There was nothing. The floor above was solid, seamless, and immovable. Then, the sound came. It was not a voice, but the heavy, mechanical slide of a steel bolt locking into place. The vibration traveled through the wood, rattling his teeth. He pressed his ear against the wall, the same way he had done in his living room hours before. He waited for the barking to return, for the transmitter to click, for the cycle to begin again. It did not come. Instead, He heard the faint, rhythmic sound of footsteps moving across the floorboards above. They were his own footsteps, recorded and played back. He realized then that the wall was not a hiding place for a stray animal. It was a cage. He was no longer the one listening. He was the one trapped.